Hello, students. Today we are going to start a new chapter from the book Vistas, and the name of the chapter is The Enemy. This is chapter number 4. The chapter number 2 and 3 are deleted from our syllabus, and that is why, after doing the chapter number 1, the third level, we are going to start a new chapter, The Enemy, written by Pearl S. Buck. And what is written about the author or about the chapter, it is the time of the World War. Now, this is the background of the story. What kind of time it was, what kind of situation, what circumstances occurred during this, when this chapter actually occurred, when what kind of circumstances were happening in the world. This is being told in before you read lines. It is the time of the World War. This is actually the Second World War we are talking about. An American prisoner of war. Now, this is very important to understand what is the meaning of POW, prisoner of war. Prisoner of war means when somebody or some enemy soldier will be captured by the army of the, you can say, enemy army, then he would be called as prisoner of war. So an American prisoner of war is washed ashore. Washed ashore means he was brought to shore by the waves, means he was actually thrown or he was actually flown with the waves, and he was in a dying state. Dying state means he was almost dying. He was totally, you can say, injured, badly, brutally injured, and is found at the doorstep of a Japanese doctor. Should he save? Now this is very important. He actually was thrown at the doorstep of a Japanese doctor, and should he save him as a doctor or hand him over to the army as a patriot? This is the question that is asked from us. Now this is very important question, and this question actually is maybe called as the theme of this chapter, because should he save means, because we are talking about a man who is a Japanese doctor, and when an enemy soldier was thrown by the waves at his doorstep, should he save his life, or as a Japanese, should he hand him over to the army or to the police as a patriot? What is the meaning of patriot? Somebody who puts his country at the top over all the other things, who is very loyal to his own country. He would be called as a patriot. Patriot hota hai deshbhakt. So should he prove himself a patriot and hand him over, और वो उसको आर्मी को सौंप दे? Or as a doctor, his first and foremost duty was to save a life. And because this American prisoner of war was thrown by the waves and he was brutally injured, it was his duty as a doctor. He was told that the first duty of a doctor is to save a life. So, should he save him as a doctor or hand him over to the army as a patriot? This is the biggest dilemma of his life. Dilemma here means DILEMMA. Dilemma means duvidha. This is the confusion in his mind. He was not able to understand what was his duty, what was his responsibility, what is bad, what is good for him. Now we are going to read the chapter. This is page number 24. Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. Means this is Dr. Sadao Hoki, his complete name is, and he is a Japanese doctor. He is a very nice, very prominent, important, very smart surgeon. Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast. Means his house was built, his house was located on the Japanese coast where as a little boy he often played. The low square stone house was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. Now, his this is very important because generally CBSE asks a question that tell us something about his house, what kind of house he had, where his house was located. So his house was located just near the Japanese coast, and it was the low square stone house was set upon rocks. It was actually set upon, it was built on rocks well above a narrow beach. It was a very narrow beach, and there his house was located on rocks, or constructed on rocks. That was outlined with, and there were so many bent pines. Pine trees were actually surrounding his house. His house was surrounded by so many pine trees. As a boy, Sadao had climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. His father, now this is very important again, as a boy, Sadao had climbed the pines. Dr. Sadao had climbed, when he was a small kid, he had climbed so many pine trees, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen, because he had seen so many people, so many men who would go and who would climb the trees in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. His father had taken him often to the island of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy at his side, those islands yonder, they are the stepping stones of to the future of for Japan. Now he is telling us something that his father generally took him when he was a small kid. He generally went to the beach with his father, and his father would tell him from the islands that there were some more islands yonder. Please underline this word, yonder. Yonder here means over there, means or you can say at a far off place there were some islands, and these islands which were to be looked over there, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan means these stones, these islands, they were very important for the future of Japan. Means he generally went to beach with his father and enjoyed his childhood. When shall we step from them? Sadao had asked seriously. Means Sadao would ask a question from his own father. And what was the question? Where shall we step from them? Means where these, you can say, stepping stones or these islands lead them to. कहाँ ले जाते हैं ये islands? Sadao had asked seriously. Who knows? His father had answered. And his father would answer that nobody knows where these stepping stones or these islands would take them or lead them to. Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it. And Dr. Sadao was told by his father in his childhood that these are your decisions. This is how you look at life. This is your decision about your life, and then your decisions would take you your, or maybe make up your future also. This is page number 25. First line. Sadao had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said. His father, who never joked or played with him, but who spent infinite pains upon him, who was his only son. Now, this is very, very, very important. This is very important to understand that what has been asked here. Sadao had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said. Means this Sadao, as in his childhood when he was a small kid, he was a very good boy and he listened and obeyed to whatever was said by his father. But his father was a very serious man. He never joked. A question can come in board exams that what kind of father Dr. Sadao's father was. So his father never joked. He was a very serious man. He never joked or played with him. He never played with him. Who spent infinite pains upon him, who was his only son. But Dr. Sadao was given due attention by his father, and his father did everything to teach him, to give him a very good education. Means father was a very serious man. He never joked or played with him, but he took infinite pains here. Means endless labor. Means he had done everything. His father had done everything to give him good education. For his education, all the efforts were made by the father. Sadao knew that his education was his father's chief concern. Now this is again very important. He knew that his education was father's chief concern. His father was most troubled or most worried, and you can say he considers Sadao's education most. For this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that he could be learned of surgery and medicine. That is why, for this very reason, because his father wanted to give proper education to Dr. Sadao, that is why Sadao was sent when he was 22 years old. He was sent to America to learn surgery and medicine, means to become a doctor, to do his MBBS. He was sent to America when he was 22 years old. He had come back at 30, and when he was 30 years old, he came back to Japan. And before his father died, he had seen him, Sadao, become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist. And after that, Dr. Sadao came back. He not only became a good surgeon but a scientist also. Now, this is something important about the character of Dr. Sadao. Not only he became a good surgeon, he was a very excellent man. He was a very learned personality, and as a surgeon, he became a scientist also, because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds he was entirely clean. Now this is important, that Dr. Sadao was perfecting a discovery. He was doing something extraordinary. He was perfecting a discovery, and his research was on wounds. He actually wanted to clean the wounds in such a way that they should cure as soon as possible. He had not been sent abroad with the troops, and that is why, because he was doing a discovery how to render wounds entirely clean, किस तरीके से जख्मों को बिल्कुल तरीके से साफ करना और उनको ठीक करना, इस पे उसकी डिस्कवरी चल रही थी. That is why he was not sent with troops to abroad means he was not sent, because it was second world war was going on, and all the army people, they were sent to with the troops to the other countries or maybe to the border, but he was never sent abroad because he was required to continue his discovery. And there is another reason also. What was that reason? That the general of that army required the best doctor with him, and the best doctor, according to general, was Dr. Sadao. Also, he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically. And there is another reason why Dr. Sadao was not sent with troops to abroad, because their general might need an operation, because the general, the person who was sitting at the highest post in the army, he was the general, and this old general was in a bad condition, and he was medically treated by Dr. Sadao. And for this possibility, Dr. Sadao was being kept in Japan. He was not sent anywhere. That is why he was kept. Usko rakha gaya Japan mein hi, because he was very important for the life of general. Next paragraph. Clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Means it was evening time and clouds were rising near the ocean, and maybe unexpected warmth of the past few days, because the last few days they were very you can say warm. That is why at night heavy fog was drawn from the cold waves. Means with the cold wave, a lot of fog was there near the coastal area. Sadao watched mist hide outlines of a little island near the shore, and then come creeping up the beach below the house, wreathing around the pines. Means Dr. Sadao, he was watching the mist. He was just enjoying the evening time, and mist hide outlines of a little island near the shore, and then come creeping up the beach below the house, wreathing around the pines. Means he was just enjoying the evening time, and he noticed that the mist was creeping here means crawling. He knew that mist was just going from one place to another, and it was moving, wreathing around the pines. In a few minutes, fog would be wrapped about the house too, and he knew that after some time his house would also be engulfed, means it would also be surrounded by fog or mist. Then he would go into the room where Hana, his wife, would be waiting for him with the two children. And this Dr. Sadao had two children, and the name of his wife was Hana. So he wanted to go to his wife Hana, and he had two children also. So he just wanted to go inside the house. He was in the veranda, and now he wanted to go inside and wanted to meet his children and his wife, because they would be waiting for him. But at this very moment, the door opened, and she looked out a dark blue woolen hauri. Now, this is hauri here means a loose outer garment. This is written in your textbooks also. Hauri here means, what is the meaning of hauri? Hauri generally means a kind of dress that would be, you can say, a loose outer garment, जिसको हम बोल सकते हैं a kind of shawl. So she had taken an outer garment over her kimono. Kimono is also a kind of clothing. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood, smiled, and said nothing. Means they actually were very affectionate, they were showing their love for each other, and they were smiling at each other, but said nothing. He had met Hana in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. These lines are really important because they tells us something about Dr. Sadao and his family. Dr. Sadao met with this lady, with this Hana, in America, and before falling in love with her, he actually wanted to assure himself, he wanted to see whether she was a Japanese or not. Because why? What was the reason why he wanted to know whether she was a Japanese or not? His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race, because his father was very, you can say, he was very peculiar kind of man, and he was very particular about these kind of things. He wanted that his son should get married only with a girl who should be pure in her race and who should be Japanese. So before marrying or before falling in love with this girl, Dr. Sadao met with her in America, and in America only he actually wanted to know whether she was from Japanese race or not, or whether she was pure or not in her race. And when it was proved, when he noticed that she was the one who could be married, then he fell in love with her. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not if he would not have met Hana. Now he actually was thinking himself to be very fortunate. He thought that he was very happy and lucky also, because he had got Hana as wife, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way. Means in a very ordinary way he met Hana, and they fell in love with each other by chance, literally actually, at an American professor's house, because they had a very chance, very, you can say, chance meeting. It was a very you can say coincidence that they met with each other in America at a professor's house. The professor and his wife had been kind people. Now the people where they actually met, these people were the professor where in professor's house he met with Hana and his wife. Professor and his wife, they were very kind people, anxious to do something for their foreign students. Means these people, this professor and his wife, they always wanted to do something special. They wanted to help the students who had come from abroad, from other countries. Through though board had accepted this kindness, and maybe these students like Hana or Sadao, they did not like the American professor and his wife because they were very boring people. They were very strange kind of people, but they had accepted, means these Japanese people and the other foreign students, they accepted their kindness. Sadao had often told Hana how nearly he had gone to Professor Harley's house that night. Means generally Hana was told by Sadao that Sadao was very lucky to have such a chance meeting with her at Professor Harley's house, and he was just remembering that that night, maybe some night, he had gone to Professor Harley's house, and the rooms were so small. This is page number 25. The rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble. Now this is very important word, very important word, because generally CBSE asks a question that what kind of people doctor, maybe doctor's professor were, and tell us something about the lady or maybe the professor's wife. So professor and his wife, they were very boring people, and their house was very small. The food they prepared was very bad. The professor's wife was so voluble. Voluble here means talkative. She was very talkative. She speaks a lot of things, and they were getting bored. They disliked her chattering, but they couldn't do anything. But he had, and at the same time their house was very small. The food which was prepared at Professor Harley's house was very bad, and the professor's wife was so talkative. But he had gone, and there he had found Hana. But the best thing in his visit to this professor's house was that he met Hana there, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. If it was at all possible means if she would happen to be a Japanese and from a pure race. This was to be confirmed by him, because he never wanted to do anything against the will of his father. Now he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him. Even though they had been married years enough to have the two children, means now they had two children, they got married some years ago, and they had a very good relationship, but still their warmth, their love for each other was still there, and they actually took each other's hands and in arms, and they were enjoying their evening. For they had not married heedlessly in America. They had finished their, means this is very important, they never married heedlessly. What is the meaning of heedlessly? Heedlessly means carelessly. They did not get married heedlessly. They did not marry carelessly in America. They had finished their work at school. School means at college. They did their MBBS or their medical and surgery, whatever they had done there, and had come home to Japan. And when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. Means before getting married to that girl, he brought her to Japan after 8 years, and then he showed that girl, he showed Hana to his father, and when this was permitted by the father, they got married. And they got married in a very, you can say, Japanese way, in with all the customs and traditions, and followed all the rituals. And when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way, because his father wanted to do everything in a Japanese way. Although Sadao and Hana had talked everything over beforehand, means everything was set by Hana and Sadao, but they took a lot of you can say considerations of their parents also, and they took the agreement and the consent of the parents. Although Sadao and Hana had talked everything beforehand, they were perfectly happy. She laid her cheek against his arm, and now they were hugging each other. It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of mists. Now they were standing at their veranda, they were hugging each other, they were having a very you can say lovely time spending with each other. But at that very moment they noticed something. What was that? Something black come out of the mists. From the mist they saw something black. Some image was there. It was a man, and he was flung out of the ocean. He was flung up. Flung up here means he was thrown. He was flung up means he was thrown out of the ocean. Flung, it seemed, to his feet by a breaker. Means he actually wanted to stand on his feet, but he was thrown by the waves. He staggered. Now this is very important word, stagger. Stagger क्या होता है? लड़खड़ा करके चलना. To totter. This is another meaning. Totter. Or to walk unsteadily. So unsteadily he walked. लड़खड़ाते हुए वो चला. A few steps, his body outlined against the mist, his arms above his head. Then he curled. The curled mists hid him again. Means he started walking. He started walking unsteadily. He wanted to come out of the ocean or from the beach, but again he fell. And maybe he was curled, he was surrounded by mist again, and he disappeared. Who is that? Hana cried. Now Hana was very anxious. She wanted to know what was that, and she asked this from her husband Sadao. Hana cried. She dropped Sadao's arm, and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. Means they both actually wanted to see who was there. Now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and knees crawling. And then they noticed that there was a man, and he was trying to crawl. To crawl here means he was not able to, because he was not able to walk properly, he was crawling with his feet and hands on the ground only. जैसे बच्चे चलते हैं दो हाथ और दो पाँव से, in the same way he was trying to crawl. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. And then they noticed that the man was totally tired, or maybe exhausted, or maybe was badly injured. That is why he, you can say, he threw himself on the floor or on the sand, and his face lied down. A fisherman, perhaps, Sadao said. Now Sadao said maybe he should be a fisherman, washed from his boat. Maybe he actually had an accident and fell from his boat and washed by the waves. He ran quickly down the steps, and behind him, this is page number 27, Hana came, her wide sleeves flying. A mile or two away on either side there were fishing villages. Now, because there was nobody there on that beach generally in the evening, this man would have been, you can say, belonged to some other village, which were, you can say, some nearby villages were there, and maybe this man belonged to a village which was located near their house, or maybe from a fishing village he would have come. A mile or two means maybe 2 or 3 kilometers away from there. But here was only the bare and lonely coast, dangerous with rocks. Now, but he was thrown at such a spot where no residential area was there, only Sadao's house was there located, and it was really dangerous because there were so many spiky rocks which were located there, and they could kill this man. The surf beyond the beach was spiked with rocks. Now this is very important because the Dr. Sadao's house was located as such a place where there were so many rocks near the seashore, and these rocks were spiked. Spiked means pointed. There were so many pointed rocks were there, and if a living being would be thrown out of the waves onto those rocks, anyone, anybody could be killed, कोई भी मर सकता था क्योंकि वहाँ पर बिल्कुल तीखे पत्थर वहाँ पर मौजूद थे. Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. Now they actually came to know that maybe that man, means that American soldier, he would be badly torn. Torn here means badly broken, badly injured. They now noticed that the man would be badly injured and exhausted, or maybe badly torn. They saw when they came toward him that indeed it was so. Means when they were coming towards that person, they noticed that he was really, indeed, he was badly torn and broken. They saw when they came towards him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through, and they noticed that the sand which was there near his head or his body was badly full of blood. Means it was red, it means that a lot of blood was coming out of his or flowing out of his body. He was badly torn and he was bleeding. खून निकल रहा है उसकी बॉडी से. He is wounded, Sadao exclaimed. Sadao said, he said that he was really wounded. Wounded here means zakhmi hai, he was badly injured. He made haste to the man. So he straight away, haste here means in hurry he went to the man. But the man was laying motionless. But the man was not moving. He was motionless, means he was unconscious. वो बेहोश पड़ा है. His face in the sand. An old cap stuck to his head. This paragraph is very important because a question can be asked by the CBSE that what was the condition of the man when Dr. Sadao met with this man for the first time. So this was the condition. Dr. Sadao went to him. The man was motionless. His face was in the sand. An old cap stuck to his head, soaked with seawater. An old cap was worn. एक ओल्ड कैप पा रखी थी उस आदमी ने, एंड it was totally soaked with sea water. It was wet. He was in wet rags. Wet rags. What is the meaning of rags? Rags means worn and torn clothes, old clothes, फटे पुराने कपड़े. So he was, you can say, wearing wet. Wet means गीले. Rags means some worn and torn or maybe overused clothes of garments. Sadao stopped. Sadao went near him. Sadao, Hana at his side, and turned the man's head. They saw the face. Then they actually turned the man's head and they saw the face of that man. And at last Hana whispered. Hana very you can say excited and at the same time very worried, because she noticed that it was nobody but a white man. White man means an American was there. Yes, it was a white man, means he was not a Japanese at all. The wet cap fell away and there was his wet yellow hair. Means this man was having yellow hair. He had white face, long, and though for many weeks it had not been cut. Means his long hair, his yellow hair were not being cut. He did not have a haircut for last many days or months maybe. And upon his young and tortured face, now this is very important, he was a young man but he was tortured, was a rough yellow beard, and he had yellow beard also. बहुत दाढ़ी भी है उसके चेहरे पे. He had beard, he had long hair, he had white face, he was young but tortured. Maybe he was tortured, he was, you can say, made badly injured. He was tortured and he was totally injured because of these injuries. He was unconscious and knew nothing about that they did for him. Means he was unconscious, वो बेहोश पड़ा है, and he did not know what kind of efforts were being made by Hana and Sadao to save him. What were they doing for him? Now Sadao remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers he began to search for it. Now Dr. Sadao went near him. He started looking for the expert fingers. Why expert fingers? Because he was an expert surgeon. He knew how, and he was doing a discovery how to render the wounds entirely clean. So वो तो इसी चीज़ के ऊपर सारा काम कर रहा है. उसकी जो रिसर्च है, इट वॉज गोइंग ऑन हाउ टू ट्रीट अ वुंड. सो with his expert fingers, because he was an expert in doing all these things, he searched for the wound. वो जख्म को ढूंढ रहा है. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. On the right side of his lower back, Sadao saw that a gun wound had been reopened. Then he actually started touching his body, and with his touch, a lot of blood starting flowing out, because maybe there was a wound and it was the blood stopped because it got clotted. But when he touched that part of the wound, the blood started flowing out again, and he noticed that it was a, you can say, gun wound, means it was a bullet on the right side of the lower back. At his lower back, at his back, there was a wound. Sadao saw that a gun wound had been reopened. There was a gun wound and it was reopened because he touched it. The flesh was blackened with powder, and the flesh, the skin around that, you can say, wound, around that injury was black, and it means that he was having that wound on his body for last many days, and it was not tended here means it was not cured, it was not, you can say, looked after. Medical treatment was not given to that wound. The flesh was blackened with powder. Sometimes not many days ago the man had been shot and had not been tended means he was not looked after. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound. It was a bad, means he was unlucky that when he was thrown out of the waves, his back part, that, you can say, injured part, was came in contact with the rocks, and that is why he started bleeding. Oh, how he is bleeding, Hana whispered again in a solemn voice. Now Hana was showing a lot of consideration. She was a very, you can say, sympathetic girl. She was very sympathetic, and she was a little bit worried about about that man. Hana whispered again in a solemn voice. Solemn means in a very serious voice. The mist screened them now completely, means they were surrounded by mist. वहाँ धुंध छाई हुई है, and at this time of the day no one came by. Generally nobody visits that place in the evening. The fisherman had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at an end. What is the meaning of chance beachcombers? Beachcombers means the people who would search for anything at the beach. So these beachcombers, the searchers, the people who would be searching for something near the beach, they would also have gone back to their homes. What shall we do with this man? Sadao muttered. Now Sadao asked. Muttered here means in a very low tone. He asked Hana. Sadao wanted to know what they should do with this man, but his trained hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could do to stanch the fearful bleeding. Please underline this word, stanch. Stanch is very important word. So to stop the flow of blood. How to stop bleeding? They actually had to do something, but his trained hands seemed to be his own, means because he was trained as a doctor, and the first duty of a doctor is to save the life of a man. So his trained hands were asking him to go and save the life, to stop the bleeding. What they could do to stanch the fearful bleeding? He was asking this from his wife. He packed the wound with the sea moss. So he started his treatment. He took some moss. Some moss was taken by him, and with the what is the meaning of moss? Small green plants on surface of water generally. So some moss, some green plants were taken by Dr. Sadao, and he put this moss on the body of the patient, or on the body of the injured man. That strewed the beach. Strewed means it was always scattered, means moss was always there. It was to be found anywhere near the sea beach. So he actually took some moss and tried to stop the bleeding. The man moaned with pain in his stupor but did not awaken. And at last the man he started moaning. Moaned means he started crying in pain. He was shouting in pain. He was yelling with pain in his stupor. Please underline this word also. Stupor here means in his unconsciousness. Torpidity is another meaning for this. So, in his stupor, in his unconsciousness, but still that man, when his body, his you can say injuries or his wounds were touched by or filled some moss by Dr. Sadao, he started moaning. Moaning means he was crying in pain but did not awaken. But he was still sleeping. He was still in an unconscious state. He was unconscious. So, today we are going to wind up here only, and tomorrow in the next class we are going to start this you can say continue this chapter from the page number 28, first paragraph. Till then, take very good care of yourself. Thank you very much.